Welcome to the Calm Cockpit Podcast, the show that helps pilots think clearly, stay calm, and perform their best when it matters most. Each episode delivers practical strategies, real-world aviation wisdom, and mindset tools that help create confident pilots and safe flights.
Today, we're talking about one of the most important safety tools in aviation, crew resource management. And here's the headline: CRM is not just for airline crews.
Whether you're flying a 747 or a Piper with a friend in the right seat, crew resource management simply means using everything available to you: people, avionics, procedures, and even your own mental state to keep the flight safe.
And today, we're especially excited because we're joined by aviation legend Brian Schiff, a seasoned captain for the major U.S. airlines with a deep-seated passion for general aviation.
Brian has spent decades thinking about what actually keeps pilots safe, and with his multiple flight instructor ratings, he is extremely adept at simplifying complex procedures and concepts while maintaining a contagious enthusiasm for all things aviation.
Together, we'll discuss communication, task saturation, pre-flight briefings to clarify roles, the use of color coding systems to signal comfort levels, and his famous two-speed mantra.
The Calm Cockpit Podcast starts now.
Onyx 12 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm Geeta Brown, licensed yoga and meditation educator and music educator with over 30 years of experience of teaching high performers how to improve their performance and their lives, but without adding stress. And I'm also a midlife student pilot.
I'm John Niehaus, corporate pilot and flight instructor. We've got a fantastic interview for you today as we welcome my friend and accomplished aviator, Brian Schiff, to the Calm Cockpit. There's so much goodness in this interview. We want to get it to you right away. But first, Geeta, can you give us a little bit of info on Brian's background?
I would be happy to. And also a little reminder that after the interview, John and I will meet you for a little post-interview debrief and give you a bunch of resources of where you can dive deeper into things with Brian, because he has a depth and breadth of information that one podcast alone cannot contain.
So true.
He is a seasoned captain for a major U.S. airline, but he also has this deep-seated passion for general aviation. Over his career, he's accumulated over 21,000 hours of flight time, and he's flown more than 100 different types of aircraft. Wow, wow, wow. He's a former member of the board of directors for the National Association of Flight Instructors, and he is also a 40-year Gold Seal flight instructor and FAA safety team representative. He is really well known for his ability to simplify complex procedures and concepts, but he maintains this contagious enthusiasm for all things aviation and teaching. He has a really, really high standard for himself, for teaching, and for flying. Is a very highly respected figure in the aviation community. And I'm just super psyched that I got to sit in the Calm Cockpit with him. And I think you guys will really enjoy the interview. So sit up tall, get ready, take a deep breath. And without further ado, we'll take you to this great interview with Brian Schiff.
Brian Schiff, welcome to the Calm Cockpit.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate you inviting me.
For the listeners that don't know, I have known Brian for a long time, dating back to our NAFI days together. And I'm so excited. We've been working on trying to find a date for us to record something, because so often I find that you and I are chatting in the car or just on the phone somewhere. And every time at the end of the conversation, it's always, if we had just recorded this, we would have had some sort of podcast episode, whether planned or not. So I'm so excited to have you here.
Absolutely. I'm glad we were able to work it out. Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations that would make good podcasts by themselves for sure.
So our most recent conversation about this, and I think we've changed topics a handful of times, but we finally settled on the idea of communication and crew resource management, or CRM, in the cockpit. We settled on this because when you think about what brings an additional layer of safety, what brings an additional layer of just comfort as a pilot, especially when you're working with other humans, whether they're passengers or ground people, ATC, a first officer, whatever kind of dynamic you might be running. Understanding what they're saying and having them understand what you're saying can bring such an extra layer of just calmness, of ease, of increase in safety for the mission. It's just something, one of those things we don't really think about all the time, but it's there, right?
It is. It's very important to be able to communicate. It's one of the probably largest aspects or facets of what we do in CRM is being able to communicate effectively to one another. And that includes student pilots all the way up to a 747 captain.
Let's just start with the sort of general understanding of what is communication and what is crew resource management. And one of the things I hear all the time, especially when I talk to sort of GA pilots, is, oh, well, that's an airline thing, or, oh, that's a large airplane jet type of thing. Talk to me about what is CRM for the general aviation pilot and why is it important?
Yeah, it's like saying CRM is for the major airline pilots is like saying, no, safety is for the airline pilots, not for me. So it's equally as important for anybody, like I said. But what CRM really is it started out as cockpit resource management, then crew resource management. It should just be everything in your universe resource management. It's the effective use of all of your resources, whether they be people, avionics, equipment, procedures that you have, checklists. These are all resources to help make a flight safe. And what we're talking about, and if people don't like acronyms or buzzwords, and maybe leave CRM for the airline pilots, but let's just talk using all your tools to make the safest flight possible. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And how does that relate to communication? Is there a technique involved in crew resource management that specifically revolves around effective communication?
Certainly. There are several things that will contribute to that. One of which is we have standard phraseology. And that's something that pilots learn from the very beginning of learning to fly, albeit many don't learn it properly. Many forget it. And then we also have the backup of let's just talk plain English. Don't try to use fancy phraseology or sound like a cool pilot. Just tell me what's on your mind. And there are times when it's important to use standard phraseology, which is most of the time. And then there are times like when talking to air traffic control, it's important to just speak English. Hey, I have this light that says this. I don't know what it means. I'm getting to my manual and I just need to be in airspace where you're watching me and I can be diverting my attention to my manual. It's okay to say something like that on the radio. I mean, if you have kind of an emergency situation or a dire situation, you should not be afraid to just use plain English and communicate it. And likewise with the standard phraseology, it's there for a reason. We also have, the phonetic alphabet and numbers. Back when radios were not very understandable is when that came out. Now we have much better audio in our radios, but the format still exists for when maybe you do have a weak signal or a weak radio or someone who's difficult to understand on the radio, and you want to make sure you get it right. So that's really what we're talking about, and then communicating effectively and actually communicating. Some people just don't communicate, and we'll talk about that too.
Yeah, and I know that one of the things that you notice when a stressful situation occurs, whether it be just an issue with the flight or even getting into kind of almost that emergency territory, that's when communication starts to break down. You start to see people kind of fall back to either their training or possibly even some bad habits. How does that kind of save you if you have the proper foundation from the beginning when all of a sudden the stress kicks in and your brain starts to kind of flutter backwards behind the airplane?
That's a good question. A great question, actually. The foundation part of it is important to get the good foundation in the beginning. But then equally important is, so you hear some people say, okay, do this to pass your check ride. And then after they start flying and they're not taking check rides anymore, that's when the bad habits start coming in. They don't necessarily use standard phraseology. They might be using fancy words and trying to be cool. And then when something goes wrong, they don't have something to fall back on. They don't have the standard operating practices. And I've had several emergencies in GA airplanes and at the airline, and I've found that you get tunnel vision. Mm-hmm. and you're going to revert to what you've been doing and what's automatic and your muscle memory. So that's why it's very important to operate on a daily basis with the standard phraseology, follow the procedures, the SOPs, the rules, because when the what hits the fan is when you're going to revert to using those and you want it to be right.
I completely agree. One of the things you listed in our show notes here is a interesting story about effective communication that happened to you. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, I had a situation, and this was at the airline under an IFR flight. Now, this can happen in GA as well, and I've had similar GA stories. So the fact that it was in a big jet is ancillary, but I was departing Los Angeles, climbing out, and air traffic control said to us, after we had checked in, because it had been bumpy in the lower altitudes in Los Angeles area. And the LA center controller said, smooth rides after Castaway, clear direct Blythe. And there are two different ways to interpret that when you hear it, depending on where you put the period. Unfortunately, when you talk on the radio, you don't have a period to see like when you do when you're reading. And so we interpret that as after Castaway, it's going to get smoother and the rides will smooth out. But for now, we're clear direct to Blythe. So we started flying direct to Blythe, VOR. And a few minutes later, the controller came back and said, are you going direct Blythe now? We said, yes, that's what you said. And that's what we read back, clear direct Blythe. Thanks for the report. That's what we said back. She says, no, you're supposed to go wait till you get to Castaway, then go direct Blythe. I said, after Castaway, clear direct Blythe. So again, smooth rides after Castaway, clear direct Blythe is not the same as smooth rides after Castaway, clear direct Blythe. Mm-hmm. So again, if the controller doesn't put the pause in there, there's two very distinct ways to read that. And so she was speaking very quickly. And we went back and listened to the ATC audio on that and discovered that we read it back the way that we did it, which was incorrect to what she intended. And she didn't correct us on it, but she did say it very quickly. And there are two meanings when you say certain things very quickly.
That's really interesting. And to bring the CRM aspect back into this, what were the two of you thinking? Were you both in complete agreement for what that meant? Was there a discussion in the cockpit? How did that go?
So when we heard the clearance, we were both in agreement because he read it back the way that we had both heard it. And once he read it back, that communication, having not been corrected by ATC, is what was set in both of us. And I put in the flight management system, direct Blythe. I had him confirm it because that's what we do. And he said, yep, that's it. And we entered it. We made the turn and proceeded direct. We didn't even question it. But when she came back and corrected us and said, no, after Castaway, direct Blythe. And we thought, I thought it was going to smooth out after Castaway because we had even discussed, I'll turn the seatbelt sign off after we get past Castaway since that's where the reports are that it will smooth out. So we had discussed exactly what we thought it was. And we were positive about that. It was just that it was a miscommunication.
Sure. And I mean, that goes to show for our listeners out there, regardless of what your skill level or experience level might be, everyone, across the timeline can make mistakes. Pilots can interpret things incorrectly, and it doesn't make you a bad pilot. It doesn't make you lose your license or certificates, depending on how you deal with it, of course. This is just one of those things that you go, well, I won't do that again.
Right. On the contrary, it makes you're not going to lose your license, but if you stop to clear something up, there have been times when I've recognized an ambiguous clearance from air traffic control. And I've questioned them. I said, look, do you mean to do this or do you mean to do that? And be very specific and talking plain English. And they come back and say, thanks for asking, because they didn't want you to do that. They wanted me to do this. And it's okay to do that. You won't lose your license if you do that. But if you do the wrong thing and you have some kind of loss of separation as a result of doing opposite of what they intended, you could have a loss of license or a punishment or worse. A generation ago, because that's what the gray hairs on my head are saying. But a great example is Rod Machado's story. I think it was him who told the story of a student pilot on short final on his first solo, was told to go around aircraft on the runway. Like an airplane had just stopped on the runway and gear up and was disabled. So the student read back the clearance. Roger, go around, aircraft on the runway. Everybody thought the right thing was going to happen, but the student continued. And the ATC says, Cessna 123, go around, aircraft on the runway. And the student reads it back again. And lo and behold, the student lands the airplane and goes around the airplane on the runway. So we have certain phrases in aviation that don't mean the same thing as they mean in our everyday life. Go around something or a go around. And for that reason, I started making my students read the pilot controller glossary and understand you're not going to memorize everything in there, but most people aren't aware that the FAA has emboldened the important terms or the often used terminology in the pilot controller glossary. So go take a look at it and look for the bold words. And all my students get assigned that. And when I give a flight review, I often quiz pilots on the pilot controller glossary bold item words. They're important.
Yeah.
I mean, I can list off several of them for you, and they might sound familiar, like affirmative. Roger, people should know what Roger means. Some people use the word Roger instead of the word affirmative. Expedite versus without delay. What does it mean to say when they say monitor or runway heading? Some very valuable tools are in there. Say again, speak slower. Unable. That's a very valuable tool, unable. And Wilco, what does that mean? What does over mean? Some people use the word over like they're talking on the CB, but that has a very distinct meaning as well. I encourage people to go study that.
Okay, I'm in check ride prep mode, so I'm thinking check ride prep. Do I know all these? Do I have all these? And there's some that I'm going, do. The number you have reached has been disconnected. I don't know what that one is, so I'm going to go look it up. I just want to highlight something you said, though, that really strikes me, like as an educator and as a musician. You were talking about the pacing of the ATC language and the lingo, how fast it is. And I know as a midlife student pilot, my first time is flying into towered environments when they're rapid fire giving me instructions as I'm climbing out. I look at my instructor, I say, is it always like this? I'm on climb out, I'm doing all this thing, and they're giving me the instruction for the next thing. He said, yes, it's always like that. You have to be prepared. But what I'm also hearing you say is that for me as a pilot, I can be emboldened to use a little bit of silence, that pause of silence, to stop, reflect, and then recommunicate. Because communication is not just the sound, it's also the silence in between. The pacing at which you answer someone might slow down the whole interaction between you and ATC. I'm just thinking if I get a communication that's rapid fire, I can say, student pilot, go slower. Did you mean X, Y, and Z? And actually influence the conversation to go at a pace that's more appropriate so that I can maintain safety. So I feel a little emboldened by that information.
Oh, good. Absolutely. And I don't know any controller, and I've met many, who would not hesitate. I don't know any controller who wouldn't slow down, help you, and want to do the right thing by you. They don't know if you're a student pilot, especially if you're good on the radio.
Right.
They might think some commercial pilots are students by the way they talk on the radio. But you're absolutely right. You use those words. Speak slower is important. I've used it as an ATP. Every time I go to Houston Intercontinental, I say student pilot, request progressive, because the taxiways have those 2-letter names on all of them. And it gets really tough, and I don't want any confusion. The goal is, between the pilot and the controller, is to have a safe operation, and that's how the system is supposed to work. And regarding the communication hasn't happened until it's been mirrored back. We actually have that in the AIM. We have it at the airline level. If we don't read back something, we are supposed to, as a matter of policy, like if I say something to my first officer and he doesn't repeat it back to me, I am supposed to assume he didn't hear it, or she. If they didn't read it back to me, we assume they didn't hear it, and I continue to say it. This doesn't always play well at home because they haven't been trained the same way. Where, I text my kids, I don't hear anything back. To me, that means they didn't know. They didn't get it. Didn't happen. Communication doesn't happen until there's a response. And I've taught my kids that. So, they've definitely learned to say KK every time I text them.
And that's important because when we're talking about effective techniques to sort of reduce the stress level in the cockpit, which is what this entire podcast is all about, we're always looking for those takeaways. And when you're thinking about your interactions with another pilot, with a student, or with your instructor, or with ATC, that assumption is one of the most damaging things, like you just said. So you have to be able to come back and say, are we on the same page? And whatever effective response that might be, as awkward as it sometimes can be, did you mean this? Or, oh, I forgot. Like, sometimes I'll say, oh, I didn't get it, even when I think I got it. You throw in 3,000 on the altitude selector, and then you sit there and you go, did they really say 3,000? Shoot. And it's just as simple as going back to them and saying, hey, was it 3,000 for Cessna 123? And they go, oh yeah, I don't care if they think I'm dumb. It doesn't really matter. What's important is that I don't go to 4,000 instead of 3,000.
Right. I would say 50% of the time when I confirm an altitude, they thank me for doing it.
Yeah.
So no one's going to think you're dumb for trying to confirm something. Don't try to look brave. I think humility is the word that came to mind. Be a little bit humble. It's okay to not understand a clearance. Like, what do you mean? Did you mean to go to this fix and then climb, or to climb now to be at that altitude before the fix, or whatever the clearance is? Ask in plain English, what did you mean by that? And nobody is going to say, what, you're being an idiot. No one's going to say that. Mm-hmm. They're going to try to make it work. And I remember when I was doing my instrument rating in the LA basin, the controller said, fly heading, maintain, establish clear for the ILS support. And I didn't get the clearance. And my dad, he got it. He was my instructor. He wasn't going to read it back to me or tell me what they said. He goes, so what do you do? I said, do I tell him to say again? Yeah. And tell him to speak slower. He said, just do it. And actually, I just said, say again. And so I said, Cessna 123, yeah, can you say that again? And he came back and he said, Cessna 123, fly heading 350. He unclicked the mic and I read back fly heading 350. And it got painfully slow, but it was super easy. And I thought he was making fun of me. And my dad said, he's not making fun of you. He's making it work. And that always stuck with me.
Well, and that's a huge technique as an instructor as well. I used to do this not just as an instructor, but also as a training captain when I was training people for jets. At all levels, when your stress level goes up, sometimes your communication goes up and you don't always recognize what you're saying, but you're saying it anyways. And there were times where I would see the student stressed out and they, again, were falling back to that base level of knowledge. So they're saying, altitudes and airspeeds, blah, 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 just like you just said. I would do that exactly what you ended up doing, where like I would take the radios and I start doing the cadence, and by me slowing it down, the student or the first officer takes that breath they needed. And next thing you know, they're slowing down and they're running their checklists and going through the procedures. And that goes with general checklist usage as well without even speaking. There are times where if your student is late or if your first officer has passengers at the door, next thing you know, they want to speed up. They want to do the thing. And this goes back to what you said on our December shift show. And I'll let you say it, but there's 2 speeds in aviation, right, Brian?
Hell yeah, 2 speeds. I have t-shirts that say that. Yeah, 2 speeds, slow or screw up. Slow and methodical, or hurried, fast, and screw up.
You want to impress somebody. You want to be ready because maybe you were supposed to have left 5 minutes ago. And next thing you know, that one really important button that you were supposed to push doesn't get pushed. And that creates a cascade of issues.
And the way I deal with that in the cockpit is either with a student pilot, like if we're going to read a checklist together, or at the airline reading a checklist, I brief my first officers before every flight. We have 2 speeds, slow and screw up. And we're going to take it at a slow pace and comfortable pace and ask me about where that came from. And it's a fun story, but we're going to take it at a slow pace. And invariably, when I start reading the checklist, they answer very quickly. I'm controlling the pace by waiting about 2 beats, and then I read the next thing on the checklist. And I don't go through it at the cadence that you probably do professionally or you see your co-pilots doing, because it's like we've done this 1,000 times. So we do it faster. And I don't fall prey to that. I go slowly. I read the checklist at a very comfortable pace, make sure it's done. And then also think of controllers. They do the same thing. They've been saying, fly this heading until established at this fix, cleared for the approach, runway, whatever. How many times a day? They can say it very quickly because they have been, and they say it maybe 100, 200 times a day. So with that in mind, they may not appreciate the fact that you're only hearing it once and you got to hear what it is. It's your first time, but he's saying it 100 times. And that's why it becomes a little bit of a mismatch. There was a controller going into St. Louis who he had this awesome radio voice. He was a very deep voice and it sounded like a great he should have been an airline captain, but he would talk very slowly, fly heading 230, descent. And it was so calming that it was comforting. And we went into St. Louis on a day when there were thunderstorms everywhere. And I was wondering, are we going to get that controller? Because we're all ramped up. And is he still going to talk like that? And he did. It was so busy. Everybody was coming out of holding pattern, all crammed together, and a lot going on with a lot of weather and a lot of tense and stress. And he just talked so slowly. It was calming our cockpit down because he was speaking so slowly, deliberately, and calmly to us.
Geeta, I'm sure you've never hit the wrong button yet, have you?
Oh no, I've been a model of perfection in all things. Are you kidding me? But you're giving me so much hope because I do tend to move very slowly. My pre-flights take forever. And I do sometimes notice that like I'm out there and the next student comes out pre-flights and is like wheels up and I am still finishing my pre-flight. But you're giving me hope that just moving at a slow, methodical pace is the way to go. But I do find myself rushing the communications when ATC is rushing me. I'm going to speak like that St. Louis controller from now on.
You're in charge of it. It's the worst thing that can happen to a controller is he can fall off his stool, but you have a lot more at stake and a lot more hazard in front of you. So you need to control that. And what I like to teach is I like to teach people about task saturation. When we get task saturated, that is when bad things happen. And task saturation is basically your time divided by tasks. How much time do I have to do this many tasks? And you feel rushed. I've got to get all these things done. That's why we like to tune frequencies in the standby ahead of time. One less thing I have to do at a busy time. So we want to control our task saturation. And one thing that we can do as pilots to control that is give ourselves more time. The tasks are kind of fixed. We have all these tasks that we have to do. We can give ourselves more time, but yet we don't. I see some pilots taxiing out, doing a run up while they're taxiing, doing the pre-flight checks while they're taxiing so that when they get to the runway, everything's finished. Well, they're compressing the opportunity to find an error, the opportunity to get everything right, and they're very task saturated, even though they're comfortable with it. But you have tools to control that saturation by slowing things down, adding time to that task saturation formula. And the tools you have are the brakes on the airplane. You hit the brakes, you stop on the ground at least, stop. Or in the air, you can slow down. You have more altitude, can buy you more time. Think of an engine failure at 3,000 feet versus 8,000 feet. And then ask for vectors. When they start turning you in for an approach, if you're flying IFR, and they say turn right, and you know this is the base turn, and you're like, oh gosh, I haven't even set up yet. That happens. It even happens to professional pilots. The tool you use is ask for vectors. No, I'd like to stay on the downwind. Can I have a longer downwind? Can I have delay vectors? Buy yourself more time for those tasks.
And pro tip, you can do that on a check ride for those of you that are preparing at all levels. You know,
Yes.
You can be in a simulator for a type ride and be hanging on to the tail of the airplane. And if they turn you in, you do not have to shoot that approach. Geeta, on a private pilot check ride, if you are short final and you don't like what you're doing, or you don't like the short field landing because you think you're going to miss the landing point, that effective communication is go around. There is no examiner that's going to fault you unless you do it about 6 times in a row, where it's like, oh, well, you went around because you didn't feel right about something. It doesn't matter what that something was. You don't have to justify it. It's the safety of the flight says, well, I might as well stay flying and make sure that I'm ready for a safe landing. Again, it's all about that effective communication and going back to advocating for yourself. And I want to get back to the threat and error stuff and your task saturation comment. One of my favorite stories, I was flying with the former executive director of NAFI, and he does tend to talk very, very fast. And this was very early on in my CFI career. So this kind of goes to show the opposite side. It's not always ATC that's talking too fast. We were flying down to Sun and Fun, which is down in Florida. And we were, somewhere in southern Georgia. And he had been given some instructions, and he's really, really fast rattling them all off, and he's asking questions and doing all these things, and the controller kind of stops and she goes, honey, we're from the South. You're going to need to slow it down a little bit. And he just kind of laughs, and he's like, oh, okay. And that was just her funny way of saying like, hey man, chill out, relax. It's all good.
It's like the Delta pilot that was going to New York, and the controller was talking fast to him, and he said, hey, sir, do you hear how fast I'm talking? He says, yes, sir. He goes, well, that's how fast I listen, too.
Not to hurt the feelings of anybody living in the South.
No,
So-
hey, I'm all for it. If you do go around on a check ride, you're probably going to get bonus points, not demerits, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that kind of links all this back into, again, that crew resource management. Let's talk about dynamics between individuals, regardless of roles and things like that. Brian, when you're a student and you have an instructor with you, sometimes it can feel, and Geeta, maybe you can chat about this as well. Sometimes it can feel like you're along for the ride. You get kind of dependent on what the instructor says, but the instructor is also sitting there trying to train the power into you to find out what your decision making is. And there can be this sort of awkward moment where I'm thinking that you're trying to take command, and you think that because I'm just sitting there staring out the window that I have some sort of command. There's that kind of weird crew environment there where nobody quite knows exactly what's going on, but we're both hoping the other person is in control. Let's chat a little bit about this.
Yeah, that's a very good conversation, and it happens very often, and it's very dangerous. It can cause a lot of problems. I kind of put it on, if I'm the student flying with an instructor, I put it on the instructor to communicate with in the form of a briefing, how that dynamic is going to work. The instructor should tell the student, look, while I'm training you, I want you to act as pilot of command like I'm not even here. I want you to make decisions. I want you to do it, act and do, make decisions. If I don't like it, I'm going to step in and let you know, and we'll change it and fix it. But in the meantime, I want to empower the student that I'm flying with, if I'm as the instructor. As a student pilot, I would still want to encourage student pilots to have that clarity beforehand. If you don't get that kind of a briefing from your instructor, ask them, how far do you want me to go? And how much do you want me to rely on you? Just ask them and make it clear. You really shouldn't, what we call it, the airline hint and hope, that this is going to go that way or that they're going to take over if something goes wrong. For example, when I'm the student pilot and I have an engine failure, for say, he's trained me what to do. If we have a real engine failure, is he going to take the airplane? Or she, or should I take it? That's something that should be briefed ahead of time. If something goes wrong, who's going to deal with it? And what are our roles? That needs to be pre-briefed. And that, I think, is very important, that a pre-briefing can clear up a lot of those uncomfortable moments that you're talking about with students and instructors. Instructors should do it. If they don't, the student should be empowered to ask for it. Say, can we talk about our roles here? How much you expect me to do? How assertive do you want me to be? While you're in command, you're trying to teach me to be in command. So it's a two-way street. And also with two private pilots flying together, that's even more dangerous. It's like two cooks in the kitchen. That briefing needs to take place.
I have one little thing to add there. When I began flying, I was afraid of flying. So that's kind of why I came to GA. Well, if I can take a discovery flight in a small airplane, then maybe I won't be terrified flying on American. And then lo and behold, I fell in love with it. Which is all to say, my initial days of training, I was extremely trepidatious. Let's just say it that way. I needed a lot of hand-holding and a lot of that structure. But my instructor used nonverbal communication on the day he saw that I was ready to make more decisions. He did one simple thing. He took his mic and he flipped it up. And every time I looked at him and asked him a question, he would just shrug and go, and he pointed his mic like, it's not working. I don't know. And that told me through that nonverbal communication, he was like, you've got it. Yeah. If it starts to go really south, I knew he would obviously, take over, but he just crossed his arms and just shrugged and just was like, just do it. That nonverbal communication really did everything. But I think you hinted really on something important here, which is for me as a student pilot, yes, we want to rely on the instructors at first for that briefing, but I found at a certain point, especially in this final check ride funnel, I'm taking it on myself to do that more thorough briefing to say below 1500, if it's engine out on the climb out, if it was just me in the airplane solo, I would do X, Y, and Z. Since you're here with me, you're going to take controls today. Are you in agreement with that? He'll say, yes, I think that's a good idea. To make it really clear, I'll say on a simulated engine out or a simulated emergency, I will do X, Y, and Z. In case of anything, though, you are immediately taking controls, and my role will be to run the radios, help you do checklists, and troubleshoot. So even taking over that briefing of me being clear about what I'm comfortable doing versus what I'm expecting either instructor to do has been really empowering. And I think that communication has de-stressed the situation because it's not in my mind then taking up mental space of what I would actually do if the engine goes out. Am I going to push forward for best glide, or I just say, your controls right away, and I get off the rudders and start troubleshooting with him? I think it's a really good point to make. So thank you.
Yeah, that's very important. And I like the fact that you do that. And I think as far as your last statement, I would say to students, never just throw your hands in the air. Keep that airplane and do what you think needs to be done until the instructor says, I've got it.
Yes.
Just assume that they're incapacitated until they're not.
Right. Three-way positive exchange of controls, always. Good point. Yes.
Yeah, always. But I think that anytime there's a discomfort in the cockpit, we as pilots are not going to say, I'm scared. We're not going to say, I'm feeling behind. We're not going to say, I don't understand what's happening right now or what ATC wants me to do. We're not going to say these things to our instructor or the other pilot we're flying with because it's our human nature. It's just our A-type personalities, generally speaking, and we are just trying to look cool. And I've had students that have been their brains are just total jello, and I didn't know it. I didn't realize it. I didn't catch it. Well, one thing that was developed at the airline that I like to take to general aviation is something that is a tool that really helps pilots communicate together and relay how they're feeling. You don't have to say, I'm scared. We use a color coding system, and that is green, yellow, and red. And you want to operate in the green all the time. Green is a calm cockpit. Green is comfortable. Green is good. When things start getting a little bit stressful and you're realizing, okay, I'm starting to get behind, I don't know what's happening here, or any kind of out of the ordinariness, I know that's not a word, that's where you're starting to get into the yellow. And that's when you want to say to the other pilot you're flying with, I don't care if you're the instructor, the student, or just another fellow private pilot, I'm getting into the yellow here. Most people will understand what that means. And then if you say I'm getting into the red, that's where I'm losing it. I need help. We need to do something right now. I'm in the yellow. I'm in the green. I'm in the yellow. I'm in the red. And we use that at the airlines quite a bit to communicate where we are. And if I see a first officer rushing through a lot of tasks and he feels like he's being rushed, I look over and I say, hey, you in the green? And they'll be like, yeah, I'm in the green. I'm good. Or no, I'm in the yellow. Okay, we slow down. Because pilots won't say, no, I'm scared of this weather. They won't say, I'm behind. I can't keep up with you. We're just not going to say those things. But the color code system works pretty good.
As a captain or an instructor, one of the other things you get really good at is understanding inflection, right? Because, somebody can say there's a difference between, I'm in the green and I'm in the green. And forgive me to the listeners if I've told this story before, but this came up when Brian and I were chatting about this, and the color coding system I think would have really helped, but it was also, I was depending on the captain to kind of interpret my lack of communication, which that was my fault, but at the same time, I was kind of hoping that he would pick up on it. I was brand new in the airplane that I was flying at the time, and we were out of Augusta, Georgia for the Masters. And I hate doing the Masters because the weather's always terrible. Augusta's a small airport. It's got some complicated overlaying airspace on top of it. And everybody just wants super long days. They want to go in the morning, they want to leave at night, and you're sitting there all day. Yeah. Well, we had been doing that, and the weather was just atrocious. There was these massive storms going through, and we had already delayed the flight to return home with the passengers. And of course, they're sitting there trying to kind of figure out when we're going to leave. And the captain, who was the assistant chief at the company I was flying with, great pilot, wonderful guy. It was kind of on him because I was so new that I didn't know what was normal for this type of situation. We saw a hole in the line of thunderstorms and we said, oh, well, if we pile up right now, we can go. Okay, reasonable. Yeah. And I remember this distinct moment. We're taxiing to the hold short line for the runway, and his name was Brian as well. Brian, are you sure about this? And that was my I don't feel great about what's about to happen, but I was so new that I didn't feel like I had the power to call anything off, even though, to his credit, I absolutely did. If at any moment I had actually used my big boy voice and said, this isn't good, he would have turned it around. And so he goes, yeah, I think it's okay. Why? Do you have a question about this? So again, effective communication, good CRM. And I went, yeah. And, this is for anybody who's ever seen The Wonder Years, this is when, Ben Savage's voice comes up and or Fred Savage comes up and says, and this is where the moment that the first officer knew they were both going to die. Because in that moment, if I had just said no, we would have stopped and at least had a larger conversation. We took off. That thunderstorm was not where we thought it was. ATC put us straight through it. And next thing you know, we're both in a situation going, oh my God, this isn't great. Obviously, everything turned out okay and things continued and you lived to learn another day. But that was one of those moments where if we had had a color coding system like, Brian, I think I'm yellow at best, I think that would have led to a larger discussion. So kudos to American for coming up with something that's just a little bit easier to discuss.
Yeah, and I think just for those listening, if there's anybody there, it actually came from, I believe, U.S. Airways. When we merged with them, that was what they were using at the time and brought it to American. And it's been fantastic. It works really well. But slowing down, giving yourself time, the 2 speeds thing, I got to tell you where that came from because it's so comfortable in the cockpit to be operating on a slow, calm, relaxed basis. But yet somehow we feel compelled to hurry. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that is, why that psychological dynamic exists, but it does. And it's a matter of perceived time. And I learned that we have a perception of how much time we have or how much time we're saving by hurrying that is way off. And so the first time when I learned this was back when I was a 727 captain. I upgraded to captain on the 727. For those of you who don't know what that is, go to the Smithsonian. There's one in there or look it up. But I was flying as about a year. I'd been a captain about a year, and we were into some contract negotiations at the airlines, and we had what was called a WOE program going on. Have you ever heard of a WOE program?
No.
If you got to be a union people to know what that means, but whoa means withdrawal of enthusiasm. So we're in contract negotiations. We wanted to show how much of an effect we could have if we're just not enthusiastic about on-time arrivals and things like that. Well, we get paid by the hour. So if we go over the scheduled time, we get more pay. So I had my first officer, my engineer. Hopefully no one in management is listening to this and statute of limitations is up. This was, well over 25 years ago. But I said, look, we're just going to go. We're going to take this slow. We'll start one engine. We start two engines. We start three. Crawling, taxiing painfully slow. It was almost painful. Like, how can I go this slow? And we were getting all our tasks done. We took off. We flew slow. We did everything at a very slow pace. We landed. We took the longest runway, didn't try to take the short taxi or hurry up. I mean, we are just going painfully slow, crawling. But at the end of the thing, we got there at the end of the flight and we were on time. And I'm like, how can that be? It wasn't the fact that we really did things much slower. It was the process of acting that way that made it so comfortable and feel like we're just crawling, but we really weren't. We really didn't save that much time. We didn't make that much time, I should say, by going that slowly. But what we all realized, all three of us in the cockpit, was that was a really easy, comfortable, I really like working at that pace kind of flight. And so from that point on, I've always told my first officers, we're going to go, we've got two speeds, slow and screw up. If we need any more time to do anything, we're going to take it. The biggest place I've seen this in training pilots, either in GA or the airline, is watching them do a go around. They feel like it's a very fast-paced maneuver and they hurry through the paces. And lo and behold, they'll be sitting there climbing out in a 172 RG and the thing just isn't climbing. Like, well, you want the gear up? Maybe. But when you go really quickly, you tend to miss things like that. And so, yeah, the two speeds things makes for a very calm cockpit. I do like that. I push it in every briefing I fly, whether it be GA or at the airlines.
And it's tough for the GA pilot, the private pilot, because you and I are spoiled. If I start going off in the weeds and hurrying and doing something that I shouldn't be doing, I at least have another person next to me going, "Hey, bonehead, what are you doing? Like, you're turning left. You should be turning right." Or he said 3,000, not 4,000. And so for someone in Geeta's position, as you earn your private pilot certificate, which of course you will, being by yourself, it can be extremely difficult to utilize those crew resource management because you are a crew of one. But the lessons, the suggestions, the things that you're supposed to do to control the safety, the pace of that flight can be really difficult when you're there monitoring yourself, but then also trying to do all of these other things. So Brian and Geeta, let's talk a little bit about your experience, but what are the suggestions that we can come up with for the pilots who are there by themselves going, CRM doesn't apply to me, crew implies more than one person? Well, that's not necessarily true.
It isn't true. And I'll tell you two suggestions that I have to address that. One is take your inner passenger, because as a private pilot or GA pilot, if you're going from A to B, you are not only the pilot, but you're the passenger. You're the person who's trying to get from A to B. As a professional pilot, you at the corporate or me at the airline, I don't care if there's a couple in row 32 that has to get to a wedding or a meeting or a soccer game or whatever they're trying to get there for to make my decisions based on safety. But when you're the private pilot flying yourself to this meeting, you're the passenger also. So advice number one, put your inner passenger in the back seat and just be the pilot. That's number one. And two, as far as the CRM goes, take your inner co-pilot and let them talk to you. So be your own co-pilot. What would you say to yourself if you were in the right seat watching yourself? Hey, dummy, slow down. Or, hey, you really ought to do the checklist. Or, hey, I think you should add fuel. We don't know if we have enough. So it's partly talking to yourself. A lot of people don't like to do that either, but it does help. You can do it mentally. You can do it quietly. But criticizing yourself, evaluating yourself, what could I have done better? What am I missing? What can I do next? Be your inner co-pilot.
Oh, I love to talk, and I love to talk to myself. So I feel so validated right now because
Well,
I
that's
find
good.
I find
It's
it
good.
really helpful, especially those first solo cross countries. It was like, what did I just do? Where am I? What is happening next? Because if I don't, it's all in my head. It's all a little abstract. And once I say it out loud, it does force me to slow down and pay
It
attention.
makes it real.
It makes it real. That's great advice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, and this kind of goes into Gita's world a little bit on sort of settling yourself and sort of the whole stress and anxiety conversation. One of my favorite things, I think I've said this before on the show, but the instructors that I've had, especially one that I had multiple times because he did my instrument, he finished my private, he did my CFI. So I learned so much from this one human being. And his favorite thing was small corrections. If you're hand flying, it doesn't matter whether you're an instrument or VFR. It was always, if he started seeing me over control, it was small corrections. And so over the years, that has become kind of like my calm phrase. When, especially on a check ride or a recurrent or something like that, where I'm really stressed out, and I just will say to myself out loud, small corrections. And next thing I know, like my hands sort of relax. I stop death gripping the yoke, and all of a sudden things start smoothing out. And it's always kind of funny because in recurrence for us, a lot of times we get paired up with people we've never met before, which introduces a whole nother layer of this sort of CRM. Now you're used to that because at the airlines, you probably fly with a new person just about every time. But at my company, we only have 8 pilots. So we fly with the same people with every mission. So I'm sitting next to somebody I've never met before, and I'm flying a instrument approach, and I'm single engine, and I'm trying to hand fly this, and I haven't done this in 9 months. So it's like, okay, I'm trying to remember how this feels. And next thing you know, you just feel me settle, and he starts looking over as I'm saying like small corrections. And I had one at the end of the sim where he came back out and he's like, at first I thought you were crazy. I heard you just kind of talking to yourself, and I couldn't, it was light enough where I didn't understand what it was when you first started talking. He goes, and then I picked it up, and then I just watched it kind of like wobble and then lock in. And so it doesn't have to be small corrections for you, but find that phrase or find that thing, that environmental effect. And Gita, I'll have you speak to this because you understand the effects a little bit more, but that one thing that just lets you kind of take that breath and then lock in, right? And that helps no matter whether you're a single pilot or not.
I think, well, I just wrote down small corrections. So that's now my mantra. But I think it's anything that you use that trains you to get your nervous system aligned more towards the parasympathetic state, which is the state you have when you're resting and relaxing, versus sympathetic nervous system arousal. Think the fight or flight, helmet fire, when everything is tunnel vision happens. That's when your sympathetic nervous system is on such high arousal, which is necessary, but it does shut down processing to the thinking part of your brain where you have that metacognition. So as pilots, to be able to attenuate your nervous system to move between those two states is crucial, and everyone has to find their own way to do that. For some people, it's going to be slow, deep breaths. Other people, it's going to be a phrase that they've trained where they just say it and they know what that means. But you have to train it before the emergency happens. You can't just be an emergency and say, well, John Niehaus said, say small corrections, and my nervous system should then slow down and I should think more clearly. It's the key is that you're training your awareness on something that helps you to feel in a state where you can have the hypersympathetic nervous system arousal, yet maintain enough control over your parasympathetic nervous system to maintain the ability to think clearly. For everyone, that's going to be different. Anything that slows your heart rate slows your speech pattern. That's why they say talk out loud and talk slowly, because it lengthens your exhale. And every time you lengthen your exhale, you're turning on that parasympathetic nervous system, which then again helps the blood pressure to go down, heart rate to go down, and actually slows down the brain waves. So singing, be the person flying, singing slowly. You may feel dumb, but it's going to make you laugh. It's going to break the log jam and get that oxygen flowing in a healthy way. But for everyone, it's different. You have to train it before the emergency happens.
That's great advice. And I had Lieutenant Colonel Tammy Bartlett on my program, and I know she's been on yours as well.
We love Tammy.
Fantastic conversation. She has a great program where she teaches exactly this kind of behavior. And I think her phrase to get yourself back locked in is to ask, what now? I have a lot of phrases from to this day that my primary flight instructor, who, AKA Dad, said when we were flying, like right rudder. How many times have you heard that? But I have students who have told me that they're flying airliners or jets today, and they still hear me say when they turn base, how do you look? An instructor will say the same terminology over and over again, and then it grades in their student's head. And, like when I'm landing an airplane, I can still hear my dad saying, hold it off, hold it off, hold it off, hold it off, and so on. But yeah, communication with yourself is very important, especially to get yourself in the right place. But I like it.
What role do you think humor plays in all of this communication?
Oh, I think it's huge. It calms people down.
Hmm.
You got to be real careful with humor, obviously,
Yeah.
because not everybody perceives it the same way. But the kind of self-deprecating humor and humility in the humor, not everybody is able to do it. So I don't want to tell everybody it may not be for you, but I have, like, sometimes I've had some of the best and most safe flights I've operated. We were laughing a lot and felt really comfortable. And I have first officers tell me that they love flying with me. They all bid to fly with me because they have a lot of fun. They laugh. Yet it's a gentle mixture of following the rules and doing everything by the book. But yet, well, how can we do that and still have fun?
Hmm.
Bill Cosby being really funny, but not using any bad words.
Hmm.
I hesitate to use him anymore because of recent news. But I mean, he was always really good at that. He could be really funny without offending. But I think humor plays a big role. It comforts people. I don't know. You could probably describe better than I could what laughing does to your brain and your cortex.
It does so many good things. That's a whole separate episode. But the thumbnail version is yogis call it like the natural breathing practice, because when you laugh, especially a good belly laugh, it gets your diaphragm engaged. And connected to your diaphragm is this amazing nerve called your vagus nerve. It's the largest cranial nerve we have. So it's in your brain. It goes down through the brainstem and it goes down into the gut. And when that nerve is activated, it again triggers us to move towards a more parasympathetic nervous state where we're calm, focused, relaxed. We're not hyper aroused and with that tunnel vision. So that good ha 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 belly laugh, even if you don't think anything is funny, you just do that motion. It triggers this whole cascade of responses in the nervous system to release all kinds of wonderful chemicals that then basically clear up our thinking in a nutshell.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But I'm just curious, how that plays out when you're in that sort of professional airline cockpit, because we passengers have this image of you up there with your hat on and the tie is up to the neck and you're flying the plane.
No, it's a lot different than that. There's a time when we're very serious. We know there's a time and a place.
Right.
So you can also, I don't want to conflate. Professionalism is not the opposite of humor.
Right.
You can have both. You've got to be careful and do it right, though. I mean, I'll be honest. I have had a captain one time who, this guy would correct me. If I'm 2 degrees off my heading, he'd say, "You're 2 degrees off. You're 20 feet." And he's looking at everything I do and nitpicking everything I do. And it caused me to make more mistakes.
Yep.
I was uncomfortable. It was not fun. And he's picking on me and I'm doing lousy.
Yep.
Then I flew with a guy that cracks me up and he's laid back. He follows the book, but he's still not nitpicking me to death, and he's more fun. And I flew a more perfect airplane flying with someone that made me more comfortable like that. And, like, for example, when you come down and you flare and you don't land like an airliner, it's not like a Cessna. You're not going to hold it off till you stall because you'll float all the way down the runway waiting for a stall. So I had a captain look at me when I was a co-pilot. I'm floating down the runway and he looks at me and he says, "You want me to request lower?" So that kind of stuff loosens up the environment, and that's like, you could be the jerk that says, "Come on, put it down. Don't, you're using up the runway." You can yell at someone, make them feel badly, or you can use humor and say, "You want me to request lower for you?" It does the same thing, but one is not as effective.
It's that great paradox that when we are generally more relaxed and focused, we get farther with our goals than if we try to rigidly control things.
True.
It's a fine line.
So true. Yeah.
Well, and it goes back to one of my favorite things that a friend of mine / former captain that I had used to always say, and this applies again to instructors and captains and everything all through the line. You will fly with a lot of different people and you will take two things from them. You'll take the things that they did really, really well, and you'll say, "Oh man, when I'm an instructor, when I'm a captain, when I'm doing this or that, I'm going to do what this person did because it worked really well. It helped me. It was effective." At the same time, you're going to go, "I am not going to do what this person did to the next person when I'm in, switching roles." And you can learn just as much from the things you don't want to do as from the things that you do. So in the case of Brian, if I'm in that role now and I have another pilot floating down the runway, am I going to be critical or am I going to maybe gently say like, "Oh, do you want me to request lower? Because I know now, having it used on me, that is more effective. And so it's interesting, that learning dynamic and how that kind of comes to play to not just grow yourself, but grow the next person in that seat who maybe has a little bit less experience than you do.
Right. Well, think of the pilot who's only flown with one flight instructor and a DPE, and then by themselves for the rest of their flying career. And then think of a pilot who's flown with many flight instructors, gets a flight review from a different instructor every time, flies with a lot of different private pilots. You are a combination of all the pilots you've flown with. You are the best things that you've kept from those pilots, and you are not the things you didn't like from those pilots, and you disregarded exactly what you just said. I'm just mirroring that because it's very true. The more people you fly with, the more things you pick up, the more good things, and you're more multifaceted as a pilot by flying with more people. So that is why I suggest to pilots, when you go for a flight review, go with someone you've never flown with before. Don't go with the same instructor every time for your flight review.
It's good advice. As we start to wind things down, and we touched on this briefly with the color coding system and with the sort of pre-takeoff briefs and stuff, the other thing that I find from a crew standpoint, and again, we use the word crew somewhat loosely, the dynamic between a pilot and a more experienced pilot, whether that is an instructor who's giving a checkout for an airline pilot who's got 30,000 hours, student flying with a new instructor, just that dynamic between, I may be piloting command of this airplane, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, this person's been flying for 20 years. They know so much more than I do, presumably. They've got so much more experience. You can kind of feel like maybe you start to subtly rely on them, even if that hasn't been spoken about,
Yeah.
What are your views on that? And how does maybe somebody in Geeta's role, as she progresses through her pilot career, she becomes a private pilot and she climbs into an airplane with me. And the mission is just, we're going to go flying. Geeta, you're PIC. I'm going to look out the window.
That's a very good question. And that dynamic needs to be addressed. There is a very clear and obvious and foolproof way to deal with that. And that is to communicate. Talk. That conversation before the flight has to happen. There's a factor of like, who's PIC? Who's the FAA going to blame for this if something goes wrong? And then there's who's the insurance company going to blame for this if something goes wrong? There are a lot of things. Like if I go flying with, let's say, Geeta, you just got your private pilot certificate and you and I want to go flying together. I've got 21,000 hours and you might have 150 hours and we're flying together and you're just going to take me up in your 172 or whatever you have and you're PIC and you're flying, but then you have a runway incursion that causes John to go around in his corporate jet because you crossed the runway. Guess who they're going to come after in that airplane? You or me, regardless of your airplane, you're in the left seat, you're the PIC. We spoke about that. So there's a lot to consider. But as far as the safety goes, if I fly with someone in their airplane and I've never flown that kind of an airplane, we need to have a conversation that, hey, I might have more experience than you overall. This is your airplane and you know it and you're qualified. If something happens, you take it, you keep it. I'm not going to take over and I don't want you to expect me to. I'm here to help. If you want something from me, ask for it. If I see something I can offer, I will tell it to you. But that conversation has to happen. If I go fly with someone in their airplane and I have a lot of experience in that airplane, I might say, again, the same example. You and I, Geeta, going flying together in a 172. I have about 3,000 hours in 172s. One of the two of us had to make an off-airport landing in a small field. I probably would be the better one to do it, but we need to have the conversation. I would ask you before we flew, do you want me to do that? Because I probably can very comfortably land it in a field if something goes wrong. Or if you say, no, I'm going to do it, then I'm probably not going to go flying. It's nothing against the pilot that I'm flying with or you. It's just that we need to have this conversation beforehand. You don't want to be fighting over who's going to do what when something goes wrong because there's a dynamic in the cockpit between two pilots. Each situation needs to be assessed, evaluated, and communicated between the two pilots.
Brilliant advice. Love it.
Yeah, one of my favorite things was we would do a want brief prior to takeoff. And so like weather, altitude, NOTAMs, and threats. And so you would do that as part of your pre-takeoff brief. And the threats was always like that open-ended, like what's going on today? Is it the weather part? Is it the thunderstorms in the air? Is it the fact that I didn't get a good night's sleep last night? Is it the fact that I'm a newly upgraded PIC and I'm still finding my voice, finding my confidence? And one of the things that I built into that early on, and some of it in my mind is a little bit of the like spread the blame. Like, yeah, I've got responsibility, but I want everybody to feel like they have that responsibility. If I'm off doing something, don't assume that I'm smart enough to know what I'm doing. I don't care if you're a private pilot. I don't care if you're a non-pilot flying in the right seat. Again, back to the GA pilot. Passengers are part of your crew if you incorporate them and properly brief them. I want you to feel the responsibility to tap me on the shoulder and go, hey, bonehead, what are you doing? Absolutely. And I think that's important.
It is. I pre-brief my first officers, and even in GA, I do the same thing. One of the things I'll do, and I said humor and humility go a long way, is that when we first get together, if we've never flown together, I look at him, I go, look, I need to let you know something. Marginal at best. Okay? Watch me. And that just cracks them up. And they know that because I said that, I'm probably not. The guys who think they're perfect probably are. But I brief them that, hey, look, if you see something, say something. I am going to verbalize my intentions, what I'm going to do all along this flight. If I think I'm going to turn left, I'm going to say turn left. If I think I should be starting down, I'm going to say I'm going to start my descent. I verbalize everything so you know what I'm thinking. And this is a good crew dynamic. And a lot of them go, oh, that's great. I love that. But I tell them, if I haven't said something and you don't know what I'm about to do, I probably don't either. And you should say something because I want you to use whatever level of assertiveness you deem appropriate in the interest of safety of this flight. So if you need to hit the brakes while we're taxiing, if you need to take the airplane and do something, do it. Don't try to hint and hope. Don't hem-haw. Don't worry about what I'm going to think. You won't hurt my feelings trying to save me. We'll talk about it afterwards. But if you feel the need to do something assertive, do it. And I think that's important to talk about between pilots as well.
And Geeta, we both know your instructor, and he would say the same thing. If you saw him as an instructor, yes, he's in control of the overall flight, but he would want you to speak up as well. And all the other student pilots out there, if your instructor is off doing something that doesn't make sense, there's that communication responsibility on your end to say, hey, maybe you have a plan for this, but I'm just not seeing it. Like, what's going on? What are we doing?
Talk about it. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that we've covered the gamut here. Threat and error management, crew resource management, single pilot operations, communication. Brian, you have been just a wealth of knowledge and suggestions. I think there's so many things that our listeners can pick out of here because, again, we're always looking for actionable strategies to bring the temperature down, bring the stress level down, let you enjoy the flights. And just as that comes down, your operational skills, your abilities go up and safer flying occurs. Brian, any last suggestions or thoughts that you want to share with our audience to put that 20,000 hours of experience to good use?
Just remember what we've said already, but remember, it's supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be fun, and you're not supposed to feel stressed out. If any of those aren't happening, stop and try to figure out why and try to fix that, especially if it's before you go flying. Don't let an uncomfortable situation continue. If a student pilot, if your instructor does something to make you uncomfortable, tell them. The way they respond is going to tell you whether you're going to stick with them or not. Remember, you're hiring them. Keep it safe, keep it fun, and of course, I can't say it enough, 2 speeds, slow or screw up. Do the first one.
Great advice. Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Crowd applause and hooray for that interview. Dearest listeners, I hope you found that useful and inspiring. I know I learned a lot about communication and crew resource management strategies, and I also really appreciate how he keeps us general aviation pilots under his umbrella as an educator. He just makes it accessible no matter what level you're at, and that takes real skill and also passion. So I think you can apply this to yourself right away, and we always usually love in the post-show interview discussion to give those key takeaways. But I mean, Brian did a great job with the key takeaways. I don't think we really need to belabor that point. And John, you and I were talking that he has such a depth of information to what he provides to the world that we felt like, did we really cover it all in this interview? And the answer is no, we did not.
True.
Not even close. So we thought maybe we could point you guys in the direction of The Schiff Show, because that is the place. If you liked anything that Brian was putting down today and want more, you can check out The Schiff Show. So The Schiff Show is a monthly aviation education variety show. It is the first of its kind, hosted by airline captain and Gold Seal flight instructor that you met today, Brian Schiff. And it's also offered for FAA Wings credit for those of you here in the United States. Each month, he does a specific theme, and he has like 5 segments to the show itself. So if they're doing like an accident review and lessons learned, they'll have an accident review section, a procedures review, techniques review, technology tips and tricks. And then one of my favorite parts is the knowledge and trivia questions, because it's Brian, so he makes it fun and applicable. So they really dive down into either a specific topic or a specific causal accident factor and incident review. You don't have to register. You can just show up. We'll include everything. All the show notes will have all the links to all of that. And we've had a few people cross over. We've had Tammy Barlett was our very first guest, who does cross-check mental performance training. She was on The Schiff Show. Jeffrey J.J. Madison, wonderful author and airline pilot, was on The Schiff Show, was on our show. And John, you were on The Schiff Show.
Yay!
So tell us about your episode that you did with him and how it kind of is representative of that deeper dive we want to make sure that people know they can get from Brian.
Yeah, I was honored to be on the show. I was invited for the December 2025 episode, and we kind of utilized my corporate/charter background to talk about a Learjet accident that happened while they were circling into the New Jersey airport of Teterboro, and just kind of the concept of what happened, why it happened, and the crew dynamic, and sort of backing up the snail trail of where the mistakes started to take place and how they compounded into an unfortunate accident that took some lives of some pilots. So it was a great episode. I was honored to be on it, and it hopefully won't be the last one.
I had looked forward to that episode for like months before it happened. I was literally sitting there. I put it up on my TV in our TV room, and I had like popcorn, and I was like cheering for the whole time. The subject matter, is a little bit heavy, but I was so happy to see you up there talking with Brian, because I think this is what we aviators do, is we look at the lessons learned and try to glean them, keep it light enough that we can keep moving forward and not get bogged down by the difficulty of it, but that rather use that as a way for self-reflection and then also real procedure management. And that episode in particular, I feel like you guys really drilled down to like the procedural level, fine-tuning of how we handle ourselves in the cockpit. And it was fantastic. There's been many, many other episodes as well. So if any of this resonated with you listeners, please go check out The Schiff Show. It's super fun to watch it live, but all of the recordings are also available because different time zones, it's the modern age. It's all available for you. So really, again, thanks so much to Captain Schiff for joining us in the Calm Cockpit. When I started back in general aviation, I had no idea I was ever even going to be able to meet him. So to be able to sit at his feet and learn was a tremendous honor for me. And listeners, as always, if you found any benefit from this or have questions or comments, just drop us an email, calmcockpit@gmail.com. We read them all. We love them all. It's fantastic to hear how the stuff is resonating for you. And remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast player if you haven't already. Please drop us that 5-star review as well. Did I forget anything?
I think the only thing I'd like to add, because we try to tailor these episodes to you. We want to find out what's important. And there's only so many ideas we can have that reflect us that we hope are things that you'd be interested in. So if you have ideas for future shows, if you have ideas for guests that you like to see, maybe not even the individual person, but just the type of guest, whether they're a clinician of some kind, a type of pilot of some kind, whatever you've got, send it to us at calmcockpit@gmail.com. We'd love to tailor episodes directly to what you find interesting and useful.
I love it. Echo that 1,000%. Can't wait to hear from you guys. So I guess that is a wrap on this episode. Thank you all so very much for listening. We always love having you here with us in the Calm Cockpit. And until next time, fly smarter
and stress less.
Boston Tower 1 departure is Airbus 321. Traffic holding crossing runway 33 left 3 lane.